Welcome to the broadcast, my dears. Red flag alert. Red flag alert. A literal red flag was waved across America at the LA Children's Hospital Gala, wasn't it, my dears? You've had your warning, because this is the second time you've seen this gown. The same gown, dispensed of the usual accessory, which is of course her favourite handbag, known as Harry. Her husband. No need for that accessory this time, was there, my dears? And I can already hear the comments coming in from the fruit machine. I can hear it coming in. Not too complimentary. Well, the gown, of course, was the piece we've seen that was created under the creative directorship of Wes Gordon for Carolina Herrera. Now, I adore both Wes Gordon, who is a genius, and Carolina Herrera, and I understand the fantasy revolving around that gown and the collection that it came from. I've spoken before about her and that particular season, the juicy fruits of Manhattan that she is able to conjure up with the juicy fruit reds and greens, and I understand the fantasy that that particular garment comes from. So personally, I won't hear disparagements towards the designer. It is the execution and the tailoring and the subject that is the problem, my dear. Of course, last time she wore it, perhaps it was to resemble a poppy, because I believe she wore a poppy to the breast. She had the temerity to flounce in with a train on that occasion, didn't she? A train as part of the gown for a military occasion, celebrating the military. And everybody has been asking for my critique for this version. And I must caveat my critique by saying that I do understand that I'm not really one to talk, but I come to you, I picked up this yellow jacket at a charity shop yesterday for £6. That is the theme of this channel. You understand that, but any newcomers might not understand. But what's River got to criticise about, dressed up like a lunatic? Well, this is about having fun, and this channel is really about the dressing up box. So I bring to you clothes not just for style, or looks not just for style, and certainly not to impress you with fashion credential, but to amuse, to entertain, to make you giggle, and yes, sometimes to impress, but that is not what I'm all about here, my dear. This is for fun. So bear that in mind when I critique others. And everybody's been asking for my critique. So I'm going to state, first of all, what is plainly obvious. Because there are pros and cons to this appearance, but what is plainly obvious is that the breasticles look dreadful. They look as dreadful this time as they did in 2021. The breasticles. And I'm going to clarify that this is not about body shaming. There is no body shaming going on here. There's nothing wrong with her body in that respect. It's not about the body. It is about the cut and the shape and the design of the gown. So don't try and get it twisted. She has a little bit more of a waist this time. A little bit more of a waist. Cut into the shape that is discernible. In 2021 she was carrying baby weight, and the face looked more swollen, and she looked swollen in general all over, as she did after Archie was born. But now, with some extra tailoring, the contours of her back and her shoulders and her pits compare favourably to the previous performance, in my opinion. And also, in my opinion, that is the main reason that she's re-wearing this piece. She wants to show everybody, look, there have been improvements in my physique since 3 years. 2, 3, 4, 3 years. Look, I just get better and better. It's a humble brag, along with the green credentials, because she's re-wearing, just as Catherine always does, re-wearing, recycling. She wants to show how worthy she is. I'm just like the peasants and the paupers. But yet again, it looks like 2 sucked out tea bags, doesn't it, my dear? I mean, even my tits look better than that. Even my tits, my little sugar buns, my dear Pinky and Perky, mine look better than that. And again, I will make the point, it's nothing to do with her body. She is a woman in her 40s who has delivered 2 children. It's the gown. It's the gown. This is what there's no excuse for. You know, it's like Marilyn Monroe or Madonna wearing their conical bras without a cone. You know, it's all cone and no waffle. What's going on? What's going on in there? It's like Wookey Hole. The caves at Wookey Hole, you know? And it actually makes her look as if she's got inverted nipples. And this is a point that was picked up on 3 years ago, so why has she not been listening to honest critique that might help the gal? Really, what is wrong with padding it out a bit? You don't have to stuff it full of cushions, but just, you know, a little bit of fluff at the pointy bits of those Dairy Lee triangles. And speaking about cheese, it also gave off the effect of a baby bell. Cheese disc, the whole affair, which is a shame because in some areas she does deserve some praise. I liked the hair. I really liked the hair. I mean, I hated the centre parting. That's not for me. But I really liked the hair. I thought, oh, she's actually getting there, embracing some of her natural curl, not steam ironing the whole affair. You know, they're calling it a sort of mermaidy look. I liked it, but I don't care for the Wallace Simpson cleavage to the hair, mirroring the baby bell slice in the middle of her chest. But I liked the hair and the texture and the colour. I thought that was a sweet spot. Now, some I know are going to say that she's looking haggard, that she's looking old. I disagree. Now, I do disagree with this, and I do defend the gal, because natural lines, as they are beginning to appear on the Duchess, I'm all in favour for. I am all in favour for. And if she was smooth as an iron, then she would also be getting it from some quarters, which I think would also be terribly unfair. Whether you want to indulge in injectables or fillers or not is up to each individual, and both ways can look good and can look great. But the fact that lines are beginning to etch in on her face is nothing that she should be ashamed of or that should be pointed out for her. Without wanting to appear too worthy and too over the top, I genuinely do think that lines are lovely, and I'm pleased to see them. And actually, it's time that there was a rebalancing of the world view when it comes to lines and to the natural cycle of the seasons and towards aging. You know, the beauty of all seasons. Beauty is not just exclusive to spring. It's there in all seasons. And it's why I praised the photographs that Alizee produced of Maggie Smith before the Dame died. Some of her last professional work was of Maggie Smith, and I praised them, didn't I? Because it was an unapologetic look at the beauty of the winter season, and I thought it was just delicious and so preferable to anything smoothed out and too filtered and too retouched. Take, for example, in contrast, photographs of one of my most precious idols and icons, Debbie Harry, our darling Deborah, so beautiful, however she looks, always stunning. But she did a recent campaign, I noticed, with Gucci, and there are stills and there is a video. She looks fabulous, she looks wonderful. I understand what they're doing. She is 79 years of age and obviously having a beautiful winter season, and I understand what they're doing. There is a place for retouching and smoothing, but actually it doesn't stir me to see the images of Debbie Harry looking retouched and smooth and a bit sort of Madonna-esque, especially when she came up from a sort of punk scene, if you know what I mean. When I see other photographs of her that are candid, out and about, where you can see lines and you can see a bit more aging, but to me they are more beautiful and more delicious, and I just wish that we had a bit more of that. Maybe if Gucci were a little bit braver. I'm not saying there isn't room for both of those looks, by the way, the more natural and the more artificial. I get it, of course I do. I'm just saying, for my personal preference, and I think for the benefit of society, I would love to see more of what we saw with Maggie Smith and Alizee, older skin, men and women everywhere. Covers, and seeing the deliciousness in it, because it really is deliciousness when you're not denied and deprived of looking at real people and real skin and aging. Spring don't last forever, no matter who you are, whether you're watching this now and you're 9 years old or 90 years old. Spring don't last forever. It comes and it goes, then you've got the rest of the seasons to deal with. So we need to bring them all into vogue throughout the rest of the life. You know, it's one of the final taboos. And I do see sense in some ways it getting a bit better than it has been over the last couple of decades, but I will propagandize it, this movement, I will, unapologetically. I've digressed a little bit, but I don't care. I like to rant and rave. And, you know, that is one thing that I will defend the Duchess of Sussex or any other Duchess or Duke in the world for. So overall, in taking the dress out of the equation, I actually loved a lot of her look from some of the angles. I didn't care to see her posing and preening in the most ostentatious, vulgar style of the Arabiste. I thought it was vulgar. But she is 43% Nigerian now, isn't she? So she appears to be 43% more tan than she appeared a few years ago. Not at the 2021 gathering, but before that she didn't appear quite so tan, did she? So that's either the Californian sunshine or Mac face and body. You tell me exactly which it is, my dear. She posed with the hospital's president, Paul Viviano, and she ingratiated herself with all the children there. They didn't look very keen on her. Her shoes didn't do anything for her at all, and the split of her dress was unflattering from many angles, mainly due to her stance and the natural way that her legs and her feet fall. It wasn't flattering, I'm afraid, didn't do much for her. Now, as I say, in 2021, she had a more swollen appearance and her hair was up then, and she'd given birth a few months before. The longer tresses at that time gave an impression of her bursting out of that split in the centre like a poached tomato. So that effect was lessened and dampened down this time with the dress being taken in, but I'm afraid it was still a fail due to the deflating bust and the lack of scaffolding or any upholstery at all. How can this attention to detail have escaped both her notice and attention and her tailors? It's like ordering a plate of cherries and being served the plate. Not very appetising. James Middleton has been in the press a lot lately because of the release of his book. I actually find it a little bit vulgar, to be quite honest with you, but I will indulge some tales he's been telling of his meeting with Alizee because it sheds light onto Harkle fiction, and it gives a very different account of the moment when Catherine met a prospective spouse, in this case Alizee. James Middleton's amour. He speaks about their first meeting. This was after they had attended a wedding close to Bucklebury, and James and his new girl, Alizee, stayed over at the Middletons one evening, unexpectedly, and they woke up the next morning to unexpected company. The Waleses, William, Catherine, and the three bairns. And they had just rolled out of bed, and Alizee was wearing one of James's shirts, an oversized gentleman's shirt. And James tells us that Alizee proffered a hand to Catherine, and there was no awkwardness at all. And soon afterwards all the children were asking questions at a rate of 100 miles an hour. And he said, then we are all talking and laughing as if she has been part of the family for years. And he said that he got a special squeeze from his sister the next day, and she whispered into his ear, she's great. So Alizee got the seal of approval from Catherine. Well, in Harry and Meghan's Netflix account of Meghan's meeting with Catherine, Meghan tells us that she's a hugger, and she didn't realise that that is jarring for some Brits, giving the impression that Catherine is so frosty and frigid and gelid that she daren't allow you to approach her. She is Elsa, she is frozen, and she will not accept any warmth emanating from this Californian raisin. Alizee proffered a hand, my dear. Alizee knew what to do. She didn't leap into the future queen's arms, expecting hugs immediately. Meghan was in ripped jeans and barefoot, she told us. And she makes out that Catherine and William expected her to be in coronation robes with a hand fan. And I'm quite sure that this was a fiction of both theirs and J.R. Mooringer, because if they clammed up in any way, then that would have only been the Cancerian instinct of William, for one thing. And that instinct was spot on because they correctly sensed that you were trouble, Meghan. That you were trouble. So it is not that they are frigid and cold and icy in nature, and that they can't bear hugs, and that they can't bear warmth. It is simply that they couldn't bear you. But by all accounts, my understanding is that you were given a fair chance, and that you were warmly embraced into the fold, actually, in the initial months of the relationship, but it became apparent very quickly, as soon as you had ingratiated yourself and the ring was on the finger and the Sussex title was yours, on loan from your husband, by gift of the Queen, our late Queen Elizabeth II, then it became apparent exactly who the unmasked creature was before them. Well, that's quite enough about them for this show. I want to turn to a little personal tribute to a man that died this week. I think it was on Friday, and that is the brother of Madonna, Christopher Ciccone, who died aged 63 of pancreatic cancer. And I think he's had it for some time. And viewers might remember that I have basketeers who know Madonna and knew Madonna back in the day, including a musician who played in the Breakfast Club and sang with her as she was coming through, Angie Smith, is a basketeer. And although Christopher had fallen out with his sister a number of years ago now, he had been living with her actually in the run-up to his death. He'd been living with her in LA at Madonna's home for the past year. And I've mentioned his book about her a few times, I think, because it's a great book. It's a great read. Life with My Sister Madonna. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very insightful. A great read if you're a fan of Madonna. I do understand totally why she felt betrayed. He shouldn't really have released such a thing, and I'm not surprised that they fell out. I do think that he was a little bit more entitled than he should have been. Although, as bitchy as that book was in some parts and as revealing, I actually left with the impression that he was full of love for his sister. Full of love. And even though it was more critical and it was the opposite of any kind of hagiography, I think that actually did her a lot of favours, because it brought some human understanding to their relationship and to her public persona and her private life. I left it feeling full of love. I think it did her favours, but I recommend it to anyone. But I do understand why she totally felt betrayed by him. But it seems, they were so close growing up. He was the force behind the power. If you don't know, he was, I wouldn't go so far as to say he was the force behind the power, but they were so close growing up. Her gay brother, they danced their way through Manhattan together throughout the early years. He choreographed a lot of her work. They worked creatively and collaboratively together on many, many of the early projects and even later projects, including, I often hail back to pop references of the past, previous decades from Hollywood through to the 70s, Liza with a Z, those stage shows of hers, be it that, and moving on into the 90s, Madonna's early pop concerts, that was 80s, wasn't it? But in particular for me, Blonde Ambition and The Girly Show. They are both productions that I have watched hundreds of times, and have been a huge influence on my life. And I mention that because he was the creative director for those shows. Blonde Ambition, the epitome of Madonna's zenith of power. He was responsible for so much of the artistic decisions behind those shows. So I'm always intrigued to what creates and inspires an artist collaboratively. Another one that I could mention, a great favourite of mine, is the artist Enya, and I've always been intrigued how she became Enya out of Enya as it was originally spelt Eithne, but she became Enya with the addition of her manager, her family's band, Clannad, was managed by Nicky Ryan, who also produced and was a sound engineer, and he took Enya under his wing as a solo artist together with his partner Roma Ryan. Roma Ryan was the lyricist for all of Enya's work. Enya wrote the music and composed, and Nicky produced. Really, Enya is a collaboration of those three minds, those creative spirits, you see, but Enya fronts it as an ostensibly solo artist. But these things, I find it very intriguing. Madonna wrote a moving tribute to Christopher, and she included some artwork of his in her post, including Like a Prayer. He was the one that conjured up that artwork, which I didn't even realise he was responsible for it until I read his book. So I'm taking that moment today just to give my little thanks and my little tribute to a life hopefully well lived, and I'm just glad that they left in a loving way, when they'd made up and made peace, and she had been looking after him in his final hours and final months, which were, according to her, very difficult and painful. And she says he's now at peace. But his work, together with his sisters, has brought many joyful moments to my life. So it's absolutely worth me mentioning it. Absolutely. Huge influence on me. Queen Camilla hosted a special reception at Clarence House for members of the community who are contributing to osteoporosis treatment and care. Previously known as the Duchess of Cornwall's Award, Her Majesty presented the Queen's Award for Osteoporosis to Dr. Nicola Peel in recognition of her work to help improve the evaluation of people at risk of fractures. The Queen is President of the Royal Osteoporosis Society, the UK's national charity for bone health, and has supported their work since 1994. Her mother, Rosalind Shand, died of the effects of osteoporosis, and more could be done now, the Queen says.
All those years ago, nobody talked about it at all. Went to the doctor, they said, "You're old, it's just getting old." So,
because her mother wasn't really diagnosed properly back in the day, and there would be so much better care for her now.
When I first started, we had 2 people in the Osteoporosis Society. I don't know how many people we've got now, Craig.
21,000.
And she shared mutual sentiments of gratitude with media representatives, and I noticed that there's no antagonism, no rancour. She's speaking with journalists from the Express, from the Mail, yada, 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 yada. And it's cordial and it's polite, even friendly, and actually quite intimate on occasion, even though she understands that sometimes they will disparage her own family and stir up drama. But unlike the Sussexes, she understands and has the maturity to be able to deal with it professionally.
Ruth is the business editor of the Daily Mail.
Yes, seen your coverage.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm so proud to meet you, and I just want to say thank you for everything you do.
Susan Hampshire was there, I noticed. And I noticed the Queen listening intently. She is generous with her time, and she gives attention to all, overlooks nobody, including this handsome and stubbly chap who assisted Her Majesty with proceedings. The Duchess of Edinburgh has been in Surrey in her new role as patron of girl guiding, and she spoke with an astronaut at the International Space Station. There was a question and answer session with astronaut Suni Williams. Sophie was very excited, actually, to speak to this astronaut who was at the International Space Station, and the astronaut told Sophie that she was missing the rain and the wind. So she's my kind of gal, my dear. I would miss the rain and the wind if I was in outer space or anywhere else, my dear. My type of weather. There are over 100 brownies, guides, rangers and guests at the Brooklands Motor Museum in Weybridge, and the necklace adorning the Duchess was the Heritage Bean by Zan, The Jacket by Gabby Hurst, and The Cashmere Jumper by Frame. She was very engaged and chatty, a bit too chatty for my taste, to be honest with you, my dears. And there were a few moments of wokeness I didn't appreciate. Keep the peasants and paupers at arm's length, Sophie dear. Keep them at arm's length. But that's the age of the Carolean for you. Bonnie Sachs says, Dear River, I have a couple of questions. If you or the fruits will help me. Oh, the basketeers are always on hand, my dear. Always on hand to answer any quiz. I will appreciate it. First, does Princess Catherine still have to curtsy to Princess Beatrice and Eugenie when not with Prince William? Second, can Prince Andrew's grandsons inherit his title, or will it revert back to the crown after his death? Well, I can only give you my understanding, my dear, when it comes to the Dukedom of York. It's a hereditary title, as is Cambridge and Wessex and Sussex. And traditionally, it is gifted to, the Duke of York title is gifted to the second son of a monarch. So if Queen Elizabeth II had stopped issuing after Anne was issued, then gone on to have no more sons at all and only had Charles as a son, then she would actually likely have gifted the Duke of York title to Prince Harry. He would have become a York. Meghan would have become a York. Isn't that a horrible thought, to think that they might have been created Yorks? Correction. Harry created a York, but she taking on the title by osmosis of Duchess of York. Harry and Meghan York are, let's be grateful for small mercies, my dear. King George V was a Duke of York because he was a second son originally. But his brother, who was Prince Albert, the Duke of Clarence, died early. He died at the age of 28, before his grandmother, Queen Victoria, and before his father, who went on to become King Edward VII. So that Duke of York went on to become a king, as did King George VI, the late Elizabeth's pa. So it is also a title that belonged to kings. Of course, the late Queen Mother was the Duchess of York at the time that she gave birth to Princesses Elizabeth and Margaret Rose. What I'm trying to say is that it is a title that comes with prestige, so I'm eternally grateful that it was not then gifted to Harry in any way, because the Dukedom of Sussex has only been created twice. Harry is the second holder of that title, and primarily it was created for the sixth son of a king, of King George III. So it was just for a sixth son, and it happened to be available when Harry's wedding to Meghan came up. Before that, it had got extinct for a couple hundred years. The title of York is inherited down the male line. Andrew has no son that we know of, no legitimate son, so the title creation does stop and it does revert to the crown upon his death. And that crown could be King Charles III, or it could be King William V, with Andrew being younger than Charles. It's likely that it will be reverting to the crown under King William V. And it will be in his gift to see who it is then issued to. Of course, it is most likely that it will be gifted to Prince Louis when his time comes and become Louis of York, but you have to bear in mind there will be sensitivities regarding that dukedom now of York because of all the controversies. So it will be a matter of taste at the time and also William's own conviction as to what he wants to do with that title, if he happens to be king at that time, if everything goes in the order expected. Could be King George by then. Nobody knows when we're all going to live and die, do they, my dear? Nobody knows, especially looking throughout royal history or anybody's history. I am not aware of any amendment made for Beatrice as a daughter of Prince Andrew or for any male grandson, certainly not aware of any amendments that might have been made. It would be possible for there to be an inheritance if letters patent were issued newly. Anything's possible, but that's not going to happen. And just to take stock of Andrew's grandchildren, there is, of course, Wolfie, who is a stepson to Princess Beatrice, so I'm afraid that's not applicable, of course, as a step-grandchild. Then Eugenie, Princess Eugenie issued August, little Gussie, first of all in 2021, and then Princess Beatrice issued Sienna later in the same year, and then Princess Eugenie issued Ernest, known as Ernie, in 2023, and Princess Beatrice is to issue yet again early next year, a bairn of unknown gender. So Andrew has no legitimate male heir, and he is unlikely to. As for Catherine, and wondering if she must still curtsy to Beatrice and Eugenie when not with Prince William, now I can only give you my understanding, and it might well be wrong, because you and I get very confused about all this, my dear, so do feel free to correct me if you are absolutely certain what goes on with all the curtsying business. But I will admit to you, my dear, and I've said this before, I will beseech the authorities and the officials to produce some kind of up-to-date compendium of all these matters, because one can't even totally rely on places like Debrett's to get everything in one place and furnish us with the correct information. And I've noticed some typos on the Debrett's website, which I'll tell you about later, but which hasn't impressed me. You want a resource that you can totally rely on. Do you understand, my dear? So I can only give you my understanding, but the Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie are, of course, HRH. But Prince William outranks them because he is the heir apparent. The Yorkies, and I realise they are not of York anymore, but I call them the Yorkies anyway, my dear, and I'll call them the York Gals and the Yorkies until they are in their dotage. They'll always be the Yorkies to me, just as little Jimmy Seven will always be little Jimmy Seven to me. I don't care if he is now James Earl of Wessex, he will always be little Jimmy Seven to me. Do you understand? The Yorkies, in theory, as blood princesses, rank higher in order of precedence than Catherine. Before the late Queen's death, yes, but even after the late Queen's death, because sovereigns' nieces rank above the wife of the heir apparent, which is Catherine. So my understanding, and do correct me if I'm wrong, and do forgive me if I'm wrong, and if you are totally sure that something else is different, then let me know, and if you are totally sure that there is another sort of protocol, then do let us know. But my understanding is that theoretically, if curtsies were performed as diligently as they were hundreds of years ago, then Catherine would have to curtsy to Beatrice and Eugenie, if on her own and not in the presence of her husband. Even now, as the Princess of Wales, she would have to curtsy. She is not a princess of the blood. Women who marry into the royal family, such as Sophie, Catherine and Meghan, gain their titles by marriage and are therefore of a lower rank than those born into titles. However, as you inferred, when wives are in their husband's presence, their status is elevated to reflect that the men are present. So at those times, we would expect to see Beatrice and Eugenie curtsying to William and Catherine. The heir apparent, William, outranks the sovereign's nieces. But my understanding is that the rule of thumb, in the context of the modern royal family, is that HRHs, as William, Catherine, Beatrice and Eugenie all are, don't curtsy to each other. They don't bother curtsying to each other, my dear, despite what any dusty old documents might decree. And my understanding is that there will be no curtsying or bobbing from Beatrice and Eugenie towards Catherine until Catherine becomes Her Majesty Queen Catherine, Queen Consort of the Kingdom. So my apologies, Bonnie dear, for not answering your question as fully as I possibly could and as fully as others might be able to with regards to the requirement of Catherine curtsying to Beatrice and Eugenie. But my understanding on a practical level is that the answer to that question is no. She does not need to curtsy to them, mainly because they are all HRH until Catherine becomes Her Majesty. Debrett's, which is considered an authority. It says, protocol dictates that when the Princess of Wales and Duchess of Sussex are not accompanied by their husbands, princesses of the royal blood, such as Princess Beatrice and Eugenie, rank above them. However, when the duchesses are accompanied by their husbands, the roles are reversed, with the duchesses outrank the princesses. As I mentioned, to my eye, there are typos here, and that should say, with the duchesses outranking the princesses. Sorry to be pedantic, but this is Debrett's. I mean, what's it coming to? And for my eye, it should have said such as Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, or Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, not such as Princess Beatrice and Eugenie. So I'll sign off now, my dear, because I'm confusing myself, so I hate to think what sort of ball of confusion I've been throwing in your direction for the past few minutes. Well, I do my best, my dear, what can I say? I do my best. I hope you had fun joining me today. Thank you for doing so, and I'll see you in the next broadcast. Take care, my dears. Ta-ra and toodle pip.